Wish. Aladdin Retold. A Tale in the Romance, a Medieval Fairytale series. Written by Demelza Carlton. Autonarrated by AI Charlotte from Google. 1. Maram wasn't sure she could think of any creature she disliked quite as much as a camel. They smelled like a carpet some drunkard had mistaken for a toilet, were about as comfortable to ride on as a bag of rocks, and they made noises reminiscent of a rutting man in the throes of the most violent lust imaginable. Actually, they were exactly like a lust-crazed man. The same hard muscle, the same sounds, and after a particularly energetic night, they didn't smell much better than a camel. But the camel's look of disgust and habit of spitting in front of her made it less attractive than a well-muscled, naked man, who would give her some pleasure, while the camel only made her backside ache. And the matted carpet of fur upon its back seemed to drink the desert sands and rub it into her clothing when she wasn't watching. Thank the heavens it was a short journey from the port to the city, where her father's palace was waiting. And a bath, an unheard-of luxury in some of the places she'd visited this trip. Oh, they'd had tubs and water and knew how to wash, but a bathhouse where a lady might immerse her whole body or share that space with her lover. They'd looked at her like she was mad. Perhaps she was, Maram reflected. Normal princesses stayed in their father's palaces until they reached an age to marry, when they meekly accepted the husband their fathers chose for them. They spent most of the rest of their lives on their backs, conceiving or giving birth to children to ensure the succession of their husband's line. A life spent in bed, their every need seen to by a host of servants. No need to travel or sit on a camel. Or even lift an eyebrow to seduce their husbands, who came to their beds every night without fail. A small smile found its way onto Maram's face. Well, most nights they went to their wives. Some nights, they fell under the spell of a foreign princess and spent a glorious night trying to please the princess instead. Skills they could then use on their wives, or at least Maram hoped they would. Just because those married princesses lived an easy life, didn't mean they shouldn't enjoy their husbands' attentions. Childbirth wasn't an easy matter, or so she'd heard, never having experienced it for herself. So if she borrowed their husbands for a night, willingly, always willingly, for men were weak and weaker still when subject to the strength of her seductive magic, she returned them with improvements she hoped their wives appreciated. An enchantment of her own design, that ensured they gave pleasure to any woman they bedded. She had not yet worked out how to eliminate the faint blue glow that enveloped their man parts while the spell was active, but perhaps it did not matter, for surely their wives had seen enough of them not to need to look too closely. Maram had certainly not heard any complaints from her lovers or their wives. And her father reaped the benefits, in strategic trade agreements, alliances and other political favors his ambassadors asked for, but she ensured. She lifted her hood so that she could see Elson, the ambassador she'd accompanied on this trip. He rode at the front of the camel train, of course, proud of his successful mission. Maram didn't begrudge him his pride, even if his success was mostly due to her. Other ambassadors had made her job more difficult. Hassan, the first ambassador she'd accompanied, had tried to force himself on her more than once, refusing to allow her to do what her father had sent her to do. Elson had been a delight in comparison, and she would tell her father so. Desert dust smudged the horizon now, and she knew she was close to home and the end of this interminable camel ride. Sure enough, the city gates soon rose out of the golden brown sand, sentinels standing straight and tall to welcome her home. Maram passed between them without glancing to either side, though she inclined her head to the bowing guards and peasants who lined the road to her father's palace. Even veiled and hooded as she was, covered in travel dust, her clothing marked her as the sultan's daughter. The sultan who would demand her report before she could take that much-needed bath. She sighed as she glimpsed her favorite bathhouse, but she could not stop. Later, she promised herself. Along with all of Elson's good news, she brought urgent tidings her father needed to know more than she needed to bathe. Even if she did smell of camel. Her father was in his audience chamber, waiting for them when they arrived. Elson prostrated himself, but Maram merely stood back, inclining her head to the Sultan when he turned his inquiring gaze on her. "So tell me what new alliances you have made for me," the Sultan said to Elsan. Not for the first time, Maram was glad for the veil that hid her face and her boredom from her father's court, as Elsan recounted her political victories. "And what of Beacon Isle?" father asked. Here Elsan hesitated. Not because his news was bad, but how close it had come to being so. Beacon Isle is ruled by a woman who calls herself a queen. Most unusual. Elsan had not understood Queen Margarita's power until it was almost too late. Instead, he'd addressed his proposals to the Queen's young grandson Varden until Maram had intervened. The boy, nay young man, for he'd proved himself more than capable in the bedchamber, had happily surrendered to her charms and left the great hall to his grandmother and Elsan. Maram had whispered a warning to Elsan that if he did not show the grandmother proper respect, her not-quite-of-age grandson would never be allowed to accept her father's proposals. Elsan had showed the woman more than respect, judging by his blushes the following morning. The newly widowed Queen Margarita had required Elsan to show her some favors too, before she granted him any. Politics was a game best played in bedchambers, Maram reflected. Or bathhouses. "But do we have access to their harbor?" the Sultan rumbled. Elsan bowed so low his forehead pressed against the floor. "Yes, Your Majesty." Queen Margarita was most insistent about that. She would have us forsake all other ports in the region to trade solely with Beacon Isle. Maram's veil hid her broad smile. Margarita knew a good bargain when she saw one. She'd toyed with Elsan until she had what she wanted. Only then had she conceded to the trade agreement with the Sultan. In her place, Maram might have done the same. Instead, she'd educated the prince who would one day make some girl a charming husband. Something Maram herself would probably never have. But what did she need a husband for? She was a princess, and her father or his heirs would provide for her until the day she died. If she needed a man for anything, she could take a lover. Someone she chose for her own pleasure, and not just to satisfy her father's political aspirations. Maram jolted out of her reverie. "Yes, Your Majesty," she asked. "Do you need to rest after your journey, or will you share the evening meal with me?" father asked. Maram bowed. "My father does me great honor. I am quite refreshed at the thought of sharing a meal with our esteemed Sultan." Father made a sound deep in his throat that told her he saw through her flattery, but he knew what she really meant, that she had news to share that she could not repeat in front of his court. News that would not wait, or she would not have appeared in court so travel-worn. Her father's attendants dismissed the court, while the Sultan himself led the way to his private chambers. Chambers that overlooked the harem gardens where his wives spent most of their lives. As Maram herself might have if it weren't for her mother's treason. Her mother's crime gave her a freedom she was grateful for every day, though it had cost her mother everything. "I keep thinking I might see your mother among them, but then I must remind myself that she is gone," father said, settling beside a well-laid table. "You can't blame yourself," Maram said quickly. "Yours was a political marriage. You were not to know that mother's heart lay elsewhere. Perhaps she and her lover are now reunited in the afterlife." Father spat out his wine. "There will be no afterlife for either of them. They are not dead, Maram, no matter what you may have been told. An enchantress or enchanter who commits treason is not put to death. They face a worse fate, a lifetime of enslavement apart." Maram's mouth dropped open. "You mean mother is alive?" Father nodded. "Alive but enslaved to a magical object. She must do the bidding of its owner until she is freed. As long as she is enslaved, she cannot age or die." "What of her lover?" Maram asked. She remembered Amani, a kind man who had conjured flowers and sweet treats for her. It wasn't until much later that she'd realized the man was her mother's lover. Father shrugged. enslaved to an old lamp I once owned. He was supposed to do my bidding, but I grew tired of seeing his face, so I got rid of it. Poor Amani, condemned to an eternity of slavery for the crime of falling in love with the wrong woman. But I do not want to think of that man, and I try not to think of your mother. Though I believe you are more beautiful now than she ever was, father said. We are alone now. No need to cover your face. Finally. She'd grown so used to bearing her face while they traveled that wearing a veil once more was irritating, though it had kept the worst of the sand out while they trekked through the desert. Maram peeled off the layers of linen and dropped them in a dusty heap on the floor. She shook out her hair and gritted her teeth as it released a small cloud of sand. The desert will not let me rest until I have told you my news, she said. Word in the port and at every oasis between there and the city is that Sheikh Basit wants to expand his territory. He has attacked several camps, sending slaves to market through the port. From what I can gather, the camps may have been in your territory at the time. That makes the slaves he's taken your people. If it is true, we cannot afford to ignore this. Father pounded his fist on the table. That grasping fool keeps sending envoys here asking for one of my daughters to be his bride. His ambition knows no bounds. That son of a camel herder. He let out a stream of less polite insults that were enough to make Maram's ears burn. Perhaps you should send him a bride, father, she said, selecting a slice of melon. She'd missed the fruit of home while traveling. Let that camel dung soil one of my daughters? Father demanded. Maram smiled. I was thinking of Anahita. Father's eyes narrowed. Do you truly think so? Maram nodded. I think it is the only way to protect your people from him. Her half-sister Anahita liked to play politics as much as Maram, though her style was more direct. Very well. Father bowed his head. Was there anything else of importance that Elson missed in his report? Not really. Except that I believe he has fallen for the charms of the mistress of Beacon Isle, Queen Margarita. Either you should send him to the Isle regularly to keep the woman sweet, or you should keep him away from her altogether, and see that he finds a bride who will replace that woman in his affections. Should I doubt his loyalty? Maram thought for a moment, then said, No, not yet. But she is a powerful enchantress, a fact she keeps hidden from many of her people, though not from me. Perhaps you should keep him away from her after all. He is a good man. It would be a shame to lose him. Who do you recommend? Someone sweet and shy, younger than he is. The opposite of the powerful queen. Perhaps one of my cousins. Hold a celebration feast for his return and see which of the girls cannot keep her eyes off him. A love match would suit him, I think. Maram sipped her tea, feeling the heat sink into her very bones. Oh, she had missed the tastes of home. It sounds like you really like this man, Father mused, not meeting her eyes. Why not you? Maram laughed. Because I am not some doe-eyed innocent who will adore him as he deserves. Besides, what would I do with a husband? I can't imagine he would allow me to travel to foreign countries, negotiating trade agreements for you. Face it, Father. I am no use to you as some man's wife. But as a jeweled courtesan, I can bring the world to your feet. You are still my daughter, and you deserve a reward. You have done more than my ambassador, I have no doubt, yet you ask for so little in reward. If you ever wished for a husband, Maram, I would grant your wish. Maram moistened her lips. You do not think I would cheat on him as my mother did to you? Sadness clouded Father's expression. You are not Brisker. There is too much of me in you. She pursued her passions with no care for the future, but you see as far as I do, and plan for the future you desire. Maram, I swear to you, if you wish for a husband, I will consent to any match you desire. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Her father would only marry her off for an alliance that brought him more benefit than she did currently as his unofficial ambassador. But her life suited Maram, so she did not say so. "Father, I promise you, the only man I want is one who will build me a palace that has its own bathhouse, an edifice to rival the grandest bathhouse in the city, but for my very own. And not even you can give me that." Maram smiled sadly. Her father's palace had been built on a plentiful water supply, but her favorite bathhouse had a spring which fed the pools inside, and no other water in the city could compare to it. Father waved her away. "Of course you must bathe. You are a dutiful daughter indeed to come to me before you have properly washed away the dust from your journey. I shall see to it that the Firdaus bathhouse is closed to all but you and your attendants for as long as you like." Maram inclined her head. "Thank you, father. It is too late in the day now, so I shall bathe in my chambers tonight, but tomorrow I will accept your offer. A bathhouse to myself for the day is reward enough, I think." It wasn't, but for now it would do. What man would want her for a wife anyway? Most men wanted a virginal bride, the sort Maram wanted for Elson. They would not want a woman who had taken dozens of lovers to her bed. Lovers who had given her pleasure but nothing else, for her healing skills were sufficient to stave off disease or pregnancy, but still. To most men that made her unclean and not a fit bride. Of course, if they met her and fell under her spell, no man could resist her, but she did not want a man by magical means. As a lover maybe, but not as her life's partner. Maram sighed. She was destined to go through life alone, taking a series of lovers, but never to truly love. At least she had the freedom to choose her lovers. Not even Anahita could claim that. And a bath. On the morrow she would have a bath. Maram clapped her hands to summon a servant to help her wash in what the palace could provide. Tomorrow she could soak, but today she could at least be clean. 2. I can make you rich beyond your wildest dreams. The Sultan's daughters will mistake you for a prince, you will be so wealthy and you may have your pick of them, the well-dressed man boasted. I am Gwandoya, and if you come to work for me, you will never go hungry again. That's because everyone who does dies, Burke muttered. Really? Aladdin asked. Burke shrugged. Well, whoever does believe him enough to go work for him, never comes back. Aladdin laughed. Well, if I went to work for him, amassed a fortune and married some princess, I wouldn't come back either. Who wants to sit around all day in an alley that stinks of piss? That's because they stable the camels here. I worked there once. Evil things, camels. They bite and spit and stand on your feet until they break all the bones, but if you fight back, you're the one who gets thrown out, Bugra piped up. The boy was not yet a man, but Aladdin had been younger than Bugra when he started coming here looking for whatever work he could find. What about you, boy? Gwandoya asked, pointing at Bugra. What do you think of my offer? What offer's that? Bugra asked. Riches untold and a princess for a bride. Gwandoya said, his eyes lighting with unholy fire. It was far too early in the morning for that sort of zealotry. Sounds better than shoveling camel shit, Bugra said, stepping forward. Will she be pretty? Far more beauteous than any woman you have ever beheld. Gwandoya promised. Hey, you don't want to do that, Aladdin said, reaching for Bugra's shoulder. He might be taking you to sell you as a slave in the market. Bugra shrugged off Aladdin's hand. He promised me a princess, he did. And gold. You're just jealous you didn't accept first. When I'm a prince, I'll come back and throw you a copper coin so you can use the baths. Meanwhile, I'll have a palace of my own. You'll see. Bugra headed off with Gwandoya, leaving the other men staring in their wake. Think we'll ever see him again? Aladdin asked. Nope, Burke drawled. Other men shook their heads. No one who goes with Gwendolen is ever seen again, an old man said sadly. Should we tell his family where he's gone? Aladdin ventured. The old man shrugged. No one to tell. His mother died last year. No one will miss him. He sighed. Much like the rest of us. If we cannot work to keep our families fed, what use are we? We should all go with Gwendolen, for it is only a matter of time before we die unmourned by anyone who matters, for our families will starve long before us. Some of the other men nodded in agreement, but none had the energy to argue. Perhaps none of them had anyone left to lose. Except Aladdin, who rose from his crouch to stare down at the hopeless humanity, who were the closest thing he had to friends. Speak for yourself. My mother would mourn me. I'm not staying here waiting to die with the rest of you. A caravan came into town last night. I heard it. I'll head down to the bazaar and see if anyone needs some extra hands to help unload the goods. Anything was better than wallowing in misery, waiting for work that would not come. So he strode out of the alley and down the main street, toward the markets, but with no idea what to do. Such was the story of his life. His father had insisted he learn to read and write, and assess the quality of goods for when Aladdin followed in his father's footsteps as a merchant. But his father had died before Aladdin was old enough to take over the business, and his mother had sold all their goods just to survive, leaving them with nothing. Not even a trade Aladdin could follow to earn a living, for he was too old to apprentice, and besides, no tradesman would take him without money to pay for his board. Money his mother no longer had. So Aladdin walked through the market, seeing good silk and bad, brass polished to look like gold and gold so dirty it looked like cheap brass, food fit for the sultan's table and stuff even a starving goat would turn its nose up at, but he could afford none of it. He was a merchant's son turned street rat, and his mother earned more money with her spinning than he did waiting all day to be hired for a day's labor that he was never offered. He made it to the other end of the market without realizing, only to find the street full of guards. Make way for the princess, one shouted, shoving a camel driver under the feet of his own lead beast. Guards who would happily let a merchant be trampled wouldn't care if they killed some street rat, Aladdin knew, so he ducked into the nearest building, the city's oldest bathhouse. He ignored the sign that said the place was closed and shouldered open the door. The shadows inside were cooler than the street, and he could hide here until the guards went past. It wasn't as though a princess would enter a public bathhouse. The Sultan's precious daughters undoubtedly bathed in the confines of the harem, where no man could gaze upon their virgin beauty. One of the guards must have seen him though, because the door was thrown open. Aladdin hurried to find some deeper shadows to hide in. He found an alcove where the staff kept the towels, and ducked behind a towering pile of cloth. Surely no one would look for him there. You may go, a deep feminine voice said grandly. A voice Aladdin heard in his very soul. Booted footsteps trooped outside at her command. A princess who used a public bathhouse? This he had to see. Unable to resist, Aladdin peeped around the towels. A veiled woman stood beside the pool while her female servants busied themselves fetching cloths and bowls of water to bathe their mistress before she immersed herself in the mineral bath. One came into his alcove, and Aladdin had to dive behind the towels again, though he doubted the serving girl saw him in the dark. But if the princess was going to bathe, he'd best get out before someone saw him. He couldn't have picked a worse hiding place if he'd tried. Aladdin pressed his eye to a crack in the shutters, hoping the streets would be clear enough to allow him to escape. No such luck. The street was filled with the princess's guards, who would capture him the moment they saw him. Peeping at the princess, however unintentionally, carried a death penalty they wouldn't hesitate to carry out. So he had to stay put and wait the woman out. Once everyone left, then he could leave. He settled on the tile floor. It was more comfortable than the alley where he'd spent more days than he could count. There. Leave me. I will summon you when I have need of you. The princess's voice echoed through the bathhouse, amplified by some sort of magic, so that it seemed she spoke beside him. Aladdin crept to the entrance of his alcove again, curious. 4 veiled women bowed, then left, and Aladdin's heart stopped as he beheld the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. The curve of her shoulders, enticing his eyes to travel down the crease of her spine to her peach-shaped bottom. His hands itched to touch her, to see if her skin was as soft as a peach. He'd eaten the fruit in his childhood, but it had been many years since he'd done more than look at them longingly in the market. But never as longingly as he looked at this woman now. A princess he had no right to stare at, though he could not drag his eyes away as she descended the shallow steps into the pool. She ducked under the surface of the water, then came up and flipped onto her back, stealing Aladdin's breath as he caught sight of her breasts. Fruit from heaven, surely so round and perfect. This princess's body was a priceless treasure none but the highest of men deserved to possess. Maybe not even then. Aladdin buried his face in his hands. He deserved to die for what he'd seen. But if he did, he would die happy. "Step out of the shadows, where I can see you," the princess commanded. One of her attendants had stayed, Aladdin guessed. He ducked back behind his towels, where the woman would not see him. "Do you really want me to summon my guards to drag you out? Come now, man. You have seen your fill of me, so it is only fair that you let me at least see your face." Aladdin risked a peek around the towels, to find the princess's dark eyes fixed on his hiding place. She spread her arms wide. "I am unarmed, as you see. I will not harm you." Just looking at her condemned him to death, but Aladdin knew he'd already sealed his fate. Fixing his gaze on her face, he took 3 tentative steps into the space before he fell to his knees, pressing his forehead to the floor. "Your Highness, my humblest apologies for my disrespect. I sought to clear the road to let your entourage pass, only to find myself trapped in here. Why does one of the Sultan's daughters do such honor to a common bathhouse?" Her laughter was low and musical, bouncing off the walls and straight into Aladdin's heart. He never reacted this way to anyone. "This is no common bathhouse. This is the first bathhouse built in the city by one of my ancestors. Better than anything in the palace, I assure you." It was Aladdin's turn to laugh, and the walls boomed the sound back at him. He clapped a hand over his mouth, but it was too late. Anyone outside had surely heard him. The princess did not sound worried. "They won't come in unless I call. They are my attendants, and they serve me." "What kind of princess are you?" he burst out. "The sort who entertains men alone if it pleases her, who prefers this bathhouse to the shallow pools in the harem. The Sultan has many daughters, and we have our own talents. Some of us are not destined for marriage alliances." She sounded almost bitter at this. "Any man who saw you would be a fool not to beg for your hand," Aladdin said. "Most men prefer other parts of my body to my hands," the princess said dryly. Aladdin lifted his startled gaze to her face. "But I thought—" Pain appeared in her eyes. "I am Princess Maram, a courtesan from the Sultan's court, who accompanies our ambassadors to far-off countries. Sometimes I persuade the men of other royal houses to look favorably on my father's proposals. Most men find my body hard to resist, though you don't seem to struggle. Why is that? Do you prefer men?" Aladdin's face reddened. "Your Highness, your beauty is irresistible indeed, but I am a humble spinner's son. I have grown used to not having things I desire, however ardently." As if to remind him that he had not eaten since the previous day, his stomach gave an alarming rumble. Princess Maram's eyes narrowed. "Yasmin, have food and refreshments brought for 2, she called. "Yes, Your Highness," came a voice from the entrance hall, but the girl did not appear. Aladdin allowed himself to breathe again. "You are too magnanimous, Your Highness." She smiled. "No, I'm quite selfish, actually. I am accustomed to having men stare at me hungrily because they desire me, not because they are starving, therefore your hunger must be satisfied. What is your name, spinner's son?
Aladdin, he choked out.
Aladdin, which means excellence and faith. A name you share with the sultan who commanded that this bathhouse be built. I think there is more to you than being a simple spinner's son. Maram's eyes seemed to see into his very soul, and Aladdin was helpless to stop her. For the first time he forced himself to meet her gaze squarely. Forgive my impertinence, princess, but I am no more and no less than my mother's son.
She smiled.
And I am my mother's daughter, which defines me more than you know. I will forgive you if you will forgive my poor choice of words.
Aladdin bowed his head to the floor once more.
There is nothing to forgive, Your Highness.
3.
Maram saw the boy duck into the bathhouse, and when she entered the cool space, she sent out her magic to search for him. She hid her smile when she found the boy hiding behind the towels. She would lure him out soon enough. First she wanted her bath. She let her attendants wash her, for the 4 of them made faster work of it than she could. Another time she might have asked one to stay, to read or sing or converse with her while she soaked in the bath, but something about the boy's presence changed her mind, so she sent them away instead. Let them think she was meeting a lover. It would not be the first time. She bit her lip, tasting blood as she cast a seduction spell on herself. The spell spread out like mist, swirling around the columns until it reached the alcove where her quarry concealed himself. She sensed his resistance and wondered if he was younger than she'd thought. A child who did not yet know a man's urges would not respond to her spell the way a man would. She called to him first with her spell and then with her voice, until the combination of command and threat brought him out of hiding. She was surprised to find not a boy at all but a man grown, though a young one who was not much taller than her. Painfully thin too, as though he did not eat enough. A thought that he confirmed early in their conversation, when his empty belly gave him away. His gaze kept drifting away from her in a way she'd never seen happen before. No man could take his eyes off her when she cast a seduction spell, especially not when she stood naked before him. Yet he resisted, this Aladdin. A prophetic name for a man met in this place, built by his namesake so many centuries before. Yasmin brought the midday meal and Aladdin disappeared back into the alcove, not venturing out until Maram dismissed Yasmin. In the servant's absence, Maram was forced to serve the food herself, but Aladdin thanked her so profusely for every bite that she found she did not mind. He ate like a man who had been brought up in court, not some starving spinner's son, as he said. When he had finished, he bowed deeply before her again and said, "You have my gratitude, kind princess. How may I repay your kindness?" "Satisfy my curiosity," she said. "Tell me what you know of magic." "I know nothing except that it killed my father, and my mother sold everything we owned to prevent it from killing me too," Aladdin said.
"How?"
Maram demanded. "She paid a witch to cast a spell on me, one that would shield me from magic." Aladdin's lip curled. "I told my mother she was wasting her money, for even if magic did exist, there was no proof that the witch could cast such a spell or that it would work." "How long ago was this?" Maram pressed.
10 years or more."
She inhaled sharply. A powerful spell indeed, to last so long and still work. He did not look convinced. Maram took a deep breath, bit her lip, and cast a second seduction spell, more powerful than the first. The last time she had done such a thing, it had taken an entire troop of eunuch guardsmen to keep the 3 men she'd targeted from taking her by force. Yet all Aladdin did was raise his head to look at her. No, to look at her face, an oddity in itself. "Did you cast a spell?" he asked.
"Yes."
"Do you feel any different?" she asked. If necessary, her guards would be here in moments, but she didn't think it would come to that. "Your Highness has treated me with kindness, allowing me to share your meal and see beauty most men only dream about. I feel as though if I were to die today, I would die happy. He frowned. Though my mother would not be so happy. Not as though you wish to do things to me? For the first time in years, Maram felt a blush color her cheeks. Your Highness, the moment I saw you, I dreamed of more than any man deserves. What I wish is of less importance than I am, and I am nothing. His dark eyes told her he spoke the truth as he believed it, impossible though it seemed. How could a man consider himself nothing? She reached out. Please rise. His hand enveloped hers, but he was too chivalrous to do more than grasp her hand as he rose uncertainly to his feet. Maram moistened her lips. Kiss me, Aladdin. Your Highness, I am not worthy. He stood as tall as she did, yet he bowed his head. What if I told you less worthy men than you have kissed me, when I did not ask them to, nor wish it? Now he met her gaze and anger fled in his eyes. Then I hope your guards cut those men down as they deserve. As they will no doubt do to me when you are done with me. No. Maram burst out. I swear they will not touch you. But I would like you to touch me. She shrugged out of her robe, so she stood naked before him once more. Aladdin laughed bitterly. Your Highness, I have done many things I am not proud of, but I have yet to sell my body, and I will not. I promised my mother when I was a boy that I would not take coin from the brothel keepers, who were very interested in me when I was younger and prettier, and I am a man of my word, even if my word is all I have left. Then I am not worthy of you, Aladdin, man of your word. Because I have sold my body countless times to secure concessions for the Sultan, and I have no doubt I will be called upon to do so many times more. Maram fought back tears. With his simple statement, the man had shamed her, yet he had done nothing wrong. Princess, kiss me. Please. Even as the words left her lips, she knew they had no power over him. He was immune to her magic, for all his pretty words. Aladdin's hand cupped her cheek. The rough skin of a man who worked for a living touched her for the first time, but she relished it. This was real. His face loomed close and she fought to slow her breathing as her heart fluttered like a bird within her ribcage. His lips were gentle as they brushed hers, tentative and light like the touch of a bird's wings. His eyes were wide with something like panic, undoubtedly mirroring her own. He'd never kissed a woman before, Maram realized. She seized his face in both hands and pressed her lips against his. He tasted of honey and spiced almond milk, as if the last drop from his cup still lingered on his tongue. She wanted more than a taste. Heavens help her, but kissing this man was like her need for air itself. Her head spun and her heart raced as never before. No man had ever had this effect on her. And he was not as immune to her spell as she'd thought. His tongue rose to dance with hers, his lips moving with her like music itself. He made a sound of satisfaction deep in his throat, as his free hand came to rest in the small of her back. Still he kissed her, stealing her breath as he breathed life into her love-starved body. No man had ever. No, princess. I gave my word. He stepped back from her, peeling her fingers gently from the hem of his tunic. She'd almost managed to tug it up and over his head. Who was he to resist her? But I want you to make love to me, Maram insisted. Making love wasn't what other men had done to her, but with Aladdin it would be different, she was certain. I want to free you from your slavery, selling your body for the good of our country, Aladdin replied. Maram snorted, an unladylike sound that no other man had ever heard from her. A princess's body is always used for the good of her country. Even the ones who form marriage alliances are brood mares for their husbands, living proof of the alliance between my father's kingdom and their husbands. So to free you, I would need to find you a husband who would love you, yet who has a kingdom to rival your father's, so that you could marry the man? He raised his eyebrows. Maram laughed. Wealth to rival my father's now, I think. He has all the alliances he needs thanks to me, but he would marry me to a wealthy man if he thought the man's wealth outweighed my value to my father as an ambassador." She shook her head. No such man existed, she was certain. And if he did, he wouldn't love her. He'd want a virgin princess, not a well-used courtesan. Yet Aladdin's eyes lit up at her words, as if they'd given him hope. "So if I were to amass a fortune, your father might be willing to bestow your hand on me? Then we could both have what we desire. You would be free, and I would be honor-bound to make love to you." Her mouth was dry. "I wish it could be so." Aladdin bowed low. "As do I, princess. But you are a princess, so beautiful you put the sun and moon to shame, and I am a humble spinner's son, with not even the coin to pay you for the meal you have so kindly given me." Maram waved away his compliments. "It is not necessary. Consider it fair payment for your refreshing conversation and company and that kiss." She licked her lips, wanting another. Aladdin seemed to read her thoughts and he backed away, toward the shadows from whence he had come. "My first, princess, and I am honored that it pleased you. I fear it will also be my last. Farewell." He disappeared into the darkness, and reluctantly she let him go. He was just a man, and a low-born one at that. So why did she feel so bereft with him gone? Maram summoned her servants to help her dress, but her thoughts were on Aladdin, the one man who could resist her spell. 4. His thoughts filled with Princess Maram, Aladdin had to force himself to sneak out the back of the bathhouse instead of returning to her, like he wanted to. She was a princess and he was nothing. He repeated this to himself, hoping that if he said it often enough, he would believe it. Because for that hour he'd spent in her company, he dreamed of more. More kisses like the one they'd shared, more such meals, maybe joining her in the bath and… No. She was a princess and he was nothing. A princess who wished to be free. A beautiful caged bird who would soar, if only her father would let her. "Did you find work today?" Aladdin glanced up to meet his mother's inquiring gaze. He'd walked home without realizing it, he'd been so deep in thought. "No, Maman. I'm sorry." She sighed. "There must be something for you. Perhaps tomorrow you will have better luck. I have spent all day spinning, so if I take this thread to the tailor's, perhaps I will have enough coin to buy bread for your supper." His unusually full stomach ached at the thought that he'd eaten, but he hadn't thought to bring anything home for his mother. "I'm not hungry, Maman. Save it for tomorrow or for yourself. I will just go to bed." But even lying on his thin straw pallet, Aladdin could not sleep. Maram and her melancholy haunted him. The perfect princess, whose kiss had awoken a longing he'd never known before. When day dawned, Aladdin was no closer to getting the girl out of his mind. He trudged to the alley where he and the other laborers waited for work that never came. Day after day he made the journey there, then home in a dreamy haze that wouldn't lift. Hunger gnawed at his insides, but he ignored it. "I can make you rich beyond your wildest dreams. The Sultan's daughters will mistake you for a prince, you will be so wealthy, and you may have your pick of them." Gwandoya's boasting burst through the haze in Aladdin's mind, as though he heard it for the first time. Aladdin rose to his feet. Yes, he wanted to pick one of the Sultan's daughters. Because he dreamed of nothing else but Princess Maram. "What about Bugra? Did you make him rich, so he married some princess?" Burke asked. "Is that why you need someone new?" Gwandoya shrugged. "The boy made his fortune so quickly, he now has more gold than he can carry. He has no desire to work for me anymore. Will you be next?" Burke spat on the ground at Gwandoya's feet. "Not me. I'm not crazy." "What about you?" Gwandoya looked Aladdin up and down, no doubt seeing what the other men did, that Aladdin was not strong enough for hard labor. Too many years with too little to eat had seen to that. You will be able to eat like a king for the rest of your life if you come and work for me. Aladdin would settle for sharing his meals with Maram. What would you have me do? Come with me and I will show you, Gwandoya said. Burke caught Aladdin's shoulder. Don't, man. Bugra's likely dead in the gutter somewhere, and if you go with him, you will be next. If he didn't find work soon, Aladdin knew he'd be dead in a gutter anyway. He hadn't eaten in 2 days, and his mother was too tired to spin. A quick death was better than starving to death, and if there was a chance he might be able to free Maram. So be it. I shall take my chances, Aladdin said. He dropped his voice to a whisper that he hoped only Burke would hear. If I survive, I swear I will return here, if only to tell you the truth of what happened to Bugra and the others. If I do not, please tell my mother that I love her and my last thoughts were of her. Whatever happened, he would no longer be a burden on his mother, for her spinning was enough to support her alone without him. Burke looked like he wanted to say more, but he pressed his lips together and nodded. May you have better fortune than the rest of us. Gwandoya clapped Aladdin on the shoulder. Good boy. You will be rich, you shall see. Aladdin wanted to believe him, so he hoped, but in his heart he dreaded what would come next. Anything that made a starving boy rich had to be unpleasant. Otherwise, why would Gwandoya share such riches with anyone? 5. Maram trudged back to her apartment, vowing not to return to the bathhouse unless he was there. Somehow that one encounter with Aladdin had left the place empty of all joy for her. She had returned every day, yet he had not. She needed to see him again. She'd been touched by so many men, but that one kiss from him had burned through her memories of all of them so that only he remained. Who was Aladdin? More than some simple spinner's son. More than any man she'd ever known, they'd shared one moment, but that moment was everything. Did you put him up to it? Maram blinked. 2 hulking shadows bracketed her favorite couch and the dark-clad figure who reclined upon the cushions. I'm still in mourning, you know, Anahita said, throwing herself down in a picture of despair. Maram smothered a laugh. In mourning for which husband? Do you even remember his name? Anahita sat up indignantly. Of course I do. It was Abd something or other. I think. Oh, what does it matter? He never wanted me to address him by his name. I was supposed to call him master, like I was a slave. Me. It is not fitting to speak ill of the dead, but that man is not mourned by anyone, least of all you, Maram finished for her. Father has a problem with Sheikh Basit. He is attacking the outlying towns and camps, taking our people as slaves. Anahita frowned. Then he is a fool, and father does him too much honor, giving me to him as a bride. Is he at least a handsome fool? Maram shrugged. I do not know. I have never seen the man. What do you care? All of your husbands meet untimely ends. One might think you drive your husbands to suicide. Oh hush. Anahita flapped her hand at the nearest guard. For all that her sister never went anywhere without them, Maram had never learned their names. Get us something to drink. The man bowed and left without a word, while his twin folded his arms across his chest to appear even more formidable. Anahita didn't even seem to notice. Maram would never understand why her sister favored these 2 enormous men as her personal guards. They'd been a gift from her first husband, a man Maram knew deserved his untimely death 10 times over. He cannot be handsome, or you would have kept this sheikh for yourself, Anahita said. The gossip in the palace is that you have a new lover in the city. One you meet in the old bathhouse near the city gates. Anahita's eyes sparkled. Who is he? Maram's heart ached at the mention of Aladdin. No one. She wet her lips. And he is not my lover. I met a man there once. I have not seen him since. But she would give everything she owned to see him again. Or for more than a kiss. Anahita whistled. A man who can resist you. A superior creature indeed. You must introduce me to this paragon. Perhaps he can keep me company when you go traveling again. A widow always needs so much consolation. No. Maram snapped, more sharply than she'd intended. She softened her tone as she continued, You'll be living in marital bliss with that sheikh, I'm sure. Marital bliss is not for the likes of me or you, Anahita said. Why else would father allow us to have apartments outside the protection of the harem? Maram shot a pointed glance at her sister's remaining bodyguard. Either one of them would be quite the temptation to her father's wives, some of whom had not spent a night with their husbands since their wedding night. Someone who hadn't grown up in a harem might think it a place full of secrets, and it was, but secrets were the currency of the place, and they flowed as freely as coins in the marketplace. For a politician like Maram, who was known to have her father's ear, nothing stayed a secret for long. Fate is fickle. You don't know what she might have in store for either of us. Perhaps you will find a handsome prince of a husband who will outlive you. And I. She might meet Aladdin again, a man of vastly changed fortunes, who could marry her the way he wished to. You might find some prince who doesn't know the difference between a virgin and a courtesan, a man so stupid he allows you to rule in his stead. Anahita finished for her with a smile. I know you. You would never be content to be anything less than a queen. I think you like the power you have over men when you travel to foreign lands. There are tales of queens who rule like men, I am told. Maram thought of Queen Margarita, a world-weary widow who was lonely without her husband. There are a few such women, and their lives are not easy. I would not aim so high. But sometimes it would be pleasant to be loved. Anahita laughed. As opposed to just being desired? You speak of that thing all the Crusader knights long for. What do they call it? Some sort of divine cup? Or is it a bowl? The Holy Grail, Maram said. And no one knows what it truly is. They speak of a story about a knight named Percival or Gawain, I forget. It is a favorite among foreign courts. The object is a myth, no more. There is always some truth in old tales, even if it is hidden deep. There are men who love their wives above all else. Now Anahita looked wistful. Those men are not princes or men with power of any kind then, Maram said gently. Anahita grinned. Not powerless at all. He must have the power to please you, surely? She pumped her hips like a rutting man might, making them both blush. Enough about men. They are poor gamblers, for they never bet anything of value. I have new jewels and trinkets from my travels, and I'm sure you have gifts from your latest husband, that you haven't yet lost in a game of chance. What say you to dice or a round of chess? It has been a long time since I have played chess. I suspect you are after that necklace, or is it the jeweled dagger? Anahita asked. I must teach my men to play, so that I might stay in practice while I am with this new sheikh. Dice then for a fair match. You will like some of my new jewels, and I always did like that dagger. Maram clapped her hands, and one of her serving women fetched her dice box. Now you are home, we should go hunting. I have a splendid new falcon, Merlin, who has a taste for frogs above all else. Anahita grinned as she selected a die made of green glass. Frogs? She sounds like a very strange bird. Has she never tasted a fat pigeon? Maram asked, choosing a die of rose-colored wood. Plenty, but if she hears a frog, she will abandon the hunt to dive for the frog. Why, I've seen her skim through the bathhouse making all the harem girls scream. Anahita's smile turned wicked. They screamed even louder when they saw the size of the frog Merlin had plucked from their bath. Maram tucked her feet up under her and shivered. I'm sure I would scream too. I do not like frogs. Slimy creatures. I'm told the Crusaders eat them as a delicacy at home, Anahita added. Perhaps Merlin was a Crusader's falcon. Maram felt sick at the thought of a frog anywhere near her mouth. Enough talk of your crazy bird. Before you cast the dice, what do you hazard? What would you like best, the necklace or the dagger? The dagger, for it will defend me better against frogs, Maram said. Anahita pulled the jeweled dagger from a fold in her robes, its sheath glittering with more jewels than the blade itself. The dagger it is then, though I doubt you will ever use it. A blade is not your style, sister. You are far more subtle than that. When men have had too much to drink, subtlety is lost on them, and a woman has need of a dagger, Maram said. Anahita nodded. You should train with me and my men one day, so that you might better defend yourself, dagger or no. For the times when a guard is not close enough to call. Anahita's eyes met Maram's in shared pain. Both had known the violence of men, and neither wished to be a victim again. Maram broke the silence. So you bet the dagger, sheath and fighting lessons with your men. I will counter with an amber comb, gifted to me by the king of Casmiris. Just a comb? My dagger is worth more than that, Anahita scoffed. Maram pulled the comb from her hair and laid it on the table. Ah, but this comb is immune to dragonfire. A dragon roasted the princess wearing it, crisping her hair to ash before it ate her, but the comb is untouched. Anahita's eyes widened. Did you see the dragon? Maram flashed an enigmatic smile. If you want to trade for tales of foreign lands, you must increase your bet. And so the game began. 6. Gwandoya led Aladdin out of the city, to where he had tethered a couple of camels. Aladdin glanced apprehensively at the large beasts with hooves as big as his head. Have you ever ridden a camel before, boy? Gwandoya asked. Aladdin shook his head, not trusting his voice. He might emit an unmanly squeak. Gwandoya barked a command at the beasts, and they both knelt down on the sand. Climb on here and hang on here, Gwandoya said, pointing. He waited for Aladdin to obey before he nodded slowly. Good. He climbed aboard his own animal, then barked another order that made the animals rise to their full height once more. Aladdin grabbed for the hairy hump in front of him to stay on the beast. Maybe we could walk instead, he asked weakly. Gwandoya laughed. And how will we carry anything back, him? These camels can carry very heavy loads, more than you, I think, boy. And we will reach our destination faster with them, oh yes. Where is our destination? Aladdin asked, but Gwandoya didn't seem to hear him. Instead, he urged his camel into motion and Aladdin had to hang on for dear life. How could something so huge move so fast? Surely its teeth were rattling in its head, like Aladdin's own. An eternity later, when Gwandoya slowed to a halt beside an oasis, Aladdin pried his cramped arms off the camel's hump. When the animal lowered itself to the ground, Aladdin slid off into the sand. He staggered toward the water. Is this our destination? He croaked. Of course not, silly boy. This is where we stop to drink, Gwandoya snapped, before hitching his smile back up. Drink your fill, for we have far to go until nightfall. Aladdin's heart sank. On the camels? He swallowed and nodded. Of course, on the camels. As you said, we will get there faster. Gwandoya eyed him. You learn fast. Maybe you will do better than the others. The others who had died, Aladdin thought before he could stop himself. He forced a smile. So I will get so much gold the Sultan will give me 2 of his daughters as wives? Gwandoya seized Aladdin by the shoulders and shook him. Not the gold. Don't touch the gold. He released Aladdin. There are other kind of wealth, things far more valuable than gold. Aladdin opened his mouth to ask what, but then he closed it again. Gwandoya had talked about Bugra having more gold than he could carry, and now Aladdin couldn't touch it? Did that mean gold had killed Bugra or something else? Something that owned the gold, perhaps? Aladdin had heard tales of dragons, but he'd never seen one. He wasn't sure he wanted to either. Not if it would be the last thing he saw. Gwandoya took out a parcel of food, and proceeded to eat his fill. Aladdin watched him with his belly growling, wishing he had the courage to ask for some from his new employer, but he didn't dare. What the man had unwrapped didn't look edible at all. If Aladdin wasn't mistaken, Gwandoya was happily crunching through a handful of large bugs. Aladdin might be hungry, but he wasn't that hungry. "Didn't you bring food, boy?" "Here, have one." Gwandoya held out his hand. A closer look only confirmed that they were indeed beetles and what looked like the most enormous crickets Aladdin had ever seen, mixed with salt and spices. "I'm not hungry," Aladdin lied, waving the creatures away. "I am eager to start work. And finish riding this benighted camel," he thought but didn't say. Gwandoya brightened. "Good. Then we shall arrive by sundown, yes?" Aladdin swallowed. "Yes." 7. By the time Gwandoya called a halt again, Aladdin was ready to leap off the camel with the sincere wish never to ride one again. Whatever flesh he'd had on his backside had been bounced off by the crazy animal's gait between the oasis and what looked like a pile of boulders. Aladdin would have no trouble when he tried to obey Gwandoya's order not to touch the gold, because who would leave anything of value in such a desolate place? There wasn't even any water here to justify stopping. Gwandoya grinned, his teeth surprisingly white in the afternoon light. "We are here, yes?" Aladdin wasn't sure how to answer, so he didn't bother. Gwandoya led Aladdin to a rock that didn't appear any different to the others, then knelt beside an old fire pit. He took a leather flask from his belt and poured the contents over the half-charred timbers. Then Gwandoya pulled out a tinderbox and set about rekindling the fire. Aladdin considered telling the man it was pointless to attempt such a thing with damp wood, but nothing this man did would surprise him any more, so Aladdin sat down on a nearby stone instead. The fire flared to life faster than any Aladdin had seen before. The liquid must have been lamp oil, Aladdin realized. Gwandoya spread his arms wide and began to chant in a language Aladdin didn't recognize, as he danced about the fire. For a moment, Aladdin thought he saw wisps of smoke rising from the man's hands, but he shook his head. He must be imagining it. Except the smoke was thickening until he couldn't deny it was real. Sparks jumped between the smoke clouds, like nothing he'd ever seen before. And still Gwandoya chanted. The man was a magician, Aladdin realized, dread clenching at his stomach. Aladdin had heard stories about dark magicians who used blood to cast spells. Was that why he needed Aladdin, to provide the blood in this unholy ritual? Is this how the other men had died? The smoke cloud surrounding Gwandoya streamed toward the stone, taking the vague shape of a man, though a giant man. The smoky figure grabbed the stone and pushed it to the side, revealing the dark entrance to, what? The underworld? Gwandoya didn't look surprised. He had done this many times, Aladdin guessed. But not enough to succeed in his dark purpose, which was why he needed Aladdin. "We're going in there?" Aladdin asked. "No, we are not." Aladdin breathed a sigh of relief. Gwandoya continued, "You are entering alone. You will journey through the underground city to the treasury. Touch nothing on the way. Once you reach the treasury, and this is very important, tuck your robes up around you so that not even the hem touches the gold in there, for if you touch it, you will surely die. Like Bugra. You are looking for a lamp. An old brass lamp that will appear out of place amid such treasure. So why is it there then?" Aladdin asked before he could stop himself. Gwandoya glared at him. "It has great personal value to me." Aladdin didn't believe a word. He might be a street rat, but he'd been raised to be a merchant, who had to know the difference between truth and lies as much as he needed to be able to sort brass from gold. "So I find this old lamp of yours, and then what? Where's the wealth you said I'd find?" Aladdin asked. Gwandoya lifted his chin proudly. "Bring the lamp to me and I shall richly reward you." Another lie. But Aladdin merely lowered his eyes and nodded. Gwandoya pulled a ring from his finger and held it out. "You will need this. This magic ring will allow you to open doors in the city." Aladdin took the ring gingerly. It seemed real enough, the black and silver speaking of its great age. "Do I have to do the dancing and chanting thing like you did?" "The inner doors are not as stubborn as the city gates. You will only need to command them to open and they will." "No chanting then." "Do I get a torch?" Aladdin asked hopefully. The city gates really did look like the gates to the underworld. "There are torches inside. They will allow you to reach the treasury," Gwandoya said. "Find the lamp and it will light your way back to me." The lamp that wasn't his, but Gwandoya wanted so badly he was willing to kill as many men as it took to bring the thing to him. But not enough to venture into the city himself. "Right. Here I go then," Aladdin said with forced cheer. Wishing he'd stayed in his own city, where he belonged, Aladdin stepped into the dark. 8. "Isn't she beautiful?" Anahita marveled as her eyes followed the falcon's flight. "I've never seen a bird fly so fast," Maram admitted. She didn't want to watch the bird make a kill, she didn't share her half-sister's thirst for blood, but she couldn't deny she envied the bird her freedom of flight. Maram might travel the world with her father's ambassadors, but right now she would give anything to fly, to be able to see everything in the city. Every man too, with the sharp eyes to recognize the one she wanted. So she might ask Aladdin why he avoided her. Maram sighed deeply. The one man she wanted, who apparently had no desire for her. Fate was laughing at her, she was certain of it. Anahita bumped her hip against Maram's as she took a seat on Maram's stone perch. "Where does he live, your bathhouse lover?" Anahita asked, peering out over the city. "Only Merlin has a better view of the city than we do from this ridge." "Why, I can see the bathhouse. Is he waiting there for you now?" Maram shook her head. "There is no one waiting for me. Not there, not anywhere. Men the world over pine for you just as you are doing now. Perhaps this lover of yours is simply fate turning the tables on you," Anahita said. She let out a piercing whistle, summoning her falcon back. The bird circled, swooped, then circled again, not seeming to want to land yet. Maram didn't blame her. Why would she give up the freedom of flight when she hadn't found what she sought? But she wasn't a bird. She was a princess, a daughter of the sultan, who did not search the alleyways of the city for a man who appeared to be a street rat, yet had higher morals than any royal prince she'd ever known. She would send a servant in search of him, Maram decided. Aladdin wasn't that common a name, she'd never known another man called that, and he lived alone with his mother, she thought he'd said. If Aladdin avoided her, his mother could not. She would send the servant, with an invitation for Aladdin's mother to present herself at the palace. Maram would share a meal with the woman and ask her why Aladdin had not returned. His mother would know, mothers always did. Her own mother, Maram shut that thought down before it could fully flower in her mind. Her own mother knew nothing of her life now, such was the fate of a treasonous former sultana. "Oh, you stupid bird! Not another frog!" Anahita cried in dismay as the bird dived into a well. Maram couldn't suppress a smile. Evidently she wasn't the only one who loved what she shouldn't. 9. For the first time, Aladdin found Gwandoya had not lied. Inside the door sat a stack of torches. He seized one and carried it back to what remained of Gwandoya's fire. It was enough to light the torch, which was all Aladdin needed. He stepped back inside the cave and set off down the tunnel into the depths. After several turns, Aladdin found himself at a crossroads of sorts, with two paths to choose from. Gwandoya and the doorway were out of sight, so there was no one he could ask for directions. Swearing, Aladdin peered down both tunnels, but neither dusty stone passage seemed more inviting than the other. This cave ran deeper than he'd thought. Deep enough for a man to get lost in, maybe. Was that how Bugra had died? Aladdin moistened his suddenly dry mouth. Other men might have died here, but he would not. He backtracked to where he found another unlit torch in a bracket on the wall and lit that too, before he headed down the right-hand passage. Any torch he saw he lit, so he'd know he'd passed this way before. Pretty soon, the warm light of all the torches behind him made Aladdin comfortable enough to start looking around him, at what wasn't a cave at all. The tunnels had been carved by tools, not nature, and he could see the marks of axes where they'd been opened out. Some tunnels came to dead ends that looked more like rooms where people had lived and worked. But where were the people? They'd left tools and clothing behind, even bedding, but everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. As though the people who lived here had left in a hurry, intending to return, but they had not. What had driven them out, and what had prevented them from returning? Aladdin wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer to either question. Especially not if the answer was somewhere in the city with him. Someone or something had killed Bugra, and Aladdin had no desire to be next. He entered, then backed out of a prayer room. Perhaps he should take a moment and pray, he thought, then decided not to bother. Who knew which direction to face anyway, so deep underground? No one would hear his prayer from here. The next corridor ended in a dead end, blocked off by a boulder that looked like a smaller version of the one at the entrance. A door, Aladdin guessed, eyeing it. Please open, he suggested. The round stone rolled smoothly aside, revealing a new passage. Aladdin breathed a sigh of relief and stepped through. More passages, more rooms, more torches, and more doors that opened at his request. Aladdin knew he descended deeper into the earth at each step, but he'd seen no sign of treasure, lamps or otherwise. If he wanted to hide a pile of untouchable gold in this maze of a city, where would he put it? Aladdin considered this for a moment, before he had his answer. He'd put it either in the very center of the city, or in the furthest depths from the entrance. Whichever was easier to defend if the city were attacked. Aladdin laughed, the sound echoing through the empty tunnels. What would he know about defending or attacking a city? He should be safely home in his. All he had to do was find the benighted lamp, hand it to the madman outside, and he could go home. Deeper he went, taking the tunnels that led down until he could go no further, for his way was barred by a bigger door than any he'd seen yet. This was the one, he was certain of it. Open please, he breathed. The door rolled open. Aladdin took a deep breath and thrust his torch inside. At first it didn't look too different from the storerooms he'd passed, with dusty casks, boxes and sacks piled up on either side of a narrow aisle. But something glowed at the end, as though he'd arrived at the surface and not the depths of the city. Aladdin crept forward, suddenly glad he was so thin, for a bigger man wouldn't have fitted so easily between the chests piled up to the ceiling. The hem of his tunic dragged along the top of a chest, revealing costly polished wood under the dust. This was the treasury all right. What had Gwandoya told him to watch out for? Not to touch the gold or let his clothing touch it. Pulling his tunic tight around him, Aladdin proceeded forward into the light. The second chamber didn't look any different from the first, at first, for whoever owned the contents of this place preferred to keep it safely locked in chests, instead of piled up all over the floor, as Aladdin might have expected. Someone with countless wealth would surely be careless with their coins. But the first glimpse he got of gold was in a chest that someone had pried open so roughly it no longer closed. Bugra would not have had the strength to do this, and nor did Aladdin. How many men had Gwandoya brought here? And why had they all failed? Aladdin rounded the corner and found his answer. A lit lamp sat in an alcove on the wall, so blackened from use it was hard to tell it was brass. But the flame was as bright as ever, illuminating a chest full of riches that surely belonged to a king or a sultan. Gold jewelry snaked around a collection of gold lamps, so shiny they hurt his eyes. Aladdin squinted and looked again. The chest was not full, it was barely half full, and some rings and a necklace lay on the ground in front of it, as if dropped by someone in a hurry to cram as much treasure as they could into a sack to take with them. Automatically, Aladdin stooped to return the treasures to their chest. "I thought you were brighter than the others," a strange voice said. Aladdin jerked upright. "Who said that?" A blue glow appeared on Aladdin's right, atop a barrel. The light grew until it took the shape of a man. A man who was as lanky as Aladdin himself, though his clothes were far finer than anything Aladdin owned. "That would be me," the bluish man drawled, snapping his fingers. The blue light vanished, leaving the magic man looking as normal as Aladdin, or as normal as any man who hadn't appeared from a ball of light. "Who are you?" The man bent double without rising from the barrel. "Kaveh, servant of the ring you wear on your finger." He nodded at Aladdin's hand. "And you?" "Aladdin." He didn't know what else to say. Unemployed street rat? Minion to the madman outside? Son of a spinner? His heart lurched at the thought of what would happen to his mother if he died here. It would break her heart. "I need to grab that lamp and get it out of here." He reached for the alcove. Kaveh whistled. "So you are brighter than the others. You're the first one who went for the right lamp." Aladdin's hand closed around it, a moment before he realized that a lit lamp would be hot to the touch. To his surprise, the metal was as cold as the stone underfoot. "Must be magic," he muttered. "Sure is. Why do you think that madman wants it so much?" Aladdin hefted the lamp in his hand. It was such a small thing, his mother had two such at home, both in much better state than this. "What does it do?" Kaveh grinned. "Give it a rub and find out." Aladdin almost obeyed, then stopped himself. Something had killed the other men Gwandoya had sent here. He'd survived this long, but who knew what Kaveh's motives were? Perhaps he'd killed them or tricked them into doing something that had. "No," Aladdin said. "I have a job to do. I must fetch this lamp from the city and bring it back to Gwandoya. Then I get paid." Not enough to let him see Maram again though, Aladdin realized with a sinking heart. A man who ate bugs wouldn't have a princess's bride price to spare. Why hadn't Aladdin thought of that before? "The only repayment he'll give you is a slit throat. He can't risk you telling anyone what you found in here," Kaveh said, as though reading Aladdin's thoughts. Aladdin sank onto a chest, his head in his hands. "What will I do? I have to get home. I need that money." Funny, Gwandoya had never mentioned just how much Aladdin's payment would be. Now he knew why. "In debt, are you?" Aladdin shook his head. "Who would lend money to someone like me? Even I know I'll never be able to repay them. No, there's this girl." Kaveh's eyes lit up with an unearthly glow. "A girl? Is she as glorious as the moon?" Aladdin's mind cast up a vision of Maram bathing naked in the bathhouse. The image from his dreams. The moon herself would weep to see her, she is so beautiful. "So you want a gift to win her affections?" Aladdin laughed. "I would need a whole kingdom before I had a chance of that. She's the Sultan's daughter, you see, and I am no prince." Kaveh nodded thoughtfully. "So you need a gift fit for a princess. You know, I think I can help you." Help never came for free. "What will you want in return?" Aladdin asked. Don't give the madman back his ring, and I'll show you the perfect thing to win your princess's heart, and her father's too." Aladdin stared at Kaveh for a moment. "What do you want me to do with the ring?" Kaveh shrugged. "Keep it. I'd like to meet this princess of yours." "She's not mine and she never will be," Aladdin said steadily. Kaveh grinned. "Never say never. Women fall in love with their heart's desire, not with whoever their father wants them to marry." Aladdin didn't bother arguing this time. Judging by his clothes, Kaveh was highborn, maybe even as highborn as Maram herself. He had no idea what it was not to be able to remember when he'd last eaten, or wonder when he might eat again. "We'd better get this lamp up to the surface. I said I would, and my word is all I have left." Aladdin rose. "You're a fool," Kaveh said. Aladdin knew he was right. Perhaps, but an honest fool. Kaveh shook his head. "I don't have to watch this." He dissolved into sparkling blue light, which streamed into the ring before the light winked out. Aladdin peered at his hand. It looked like an ordinary silver ring, but he knew he hadn't imagined Kaveh. Aladdin tucked the lamp inside his tunic, before tightening his sash to make sure it didn't fall out. He'd come too far to lose it now. The hike back through the tunnels seemed a lot shorter now. Maybe it was because he was headed for the surface, or he knew where he was going, Aladdin wasn't sure, but there was a spring in his step as he glimpsed the yawning entrance to the cavern he'd dreaded when he first saw it. How wrong he was. "Do you have it?" Gwandoya asked eagerly, his shadow blocking the light coming from the entrance. Aladdin dug into his tunic and produced the sorry-looking lamp. "Yes." Gwandoya beckoned him closer. "Give it to me." He wasn't just eager, he seemed rabid, Aladdin thought uneasily. "Where is the payment you promised me?" Aladdin demanded. Gwandoya wet his lips. "It is back in the city. I will pay you on our return." Back went the lamp into the depths of his clothes. "Then I will keep it a while longer." "I said give it to me." His instincts screamed at him to obey, but Aladdin ignored them. "And I said pay me." The two men stared at one another, Gwandoya's chest heaving as though it cost him a great deal not to kill Aladdin on the spot. All the more reason to hang on to the thing the madman wanted, Aladdin told himself. Gwandoya forced out a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "As you wish, boy. But return my ring." "Don't do it." Kaveh's voice whispered. The smile died. "What did you say?" Aladdin swallowed. Of course." With shaking hands, he pulled the ring from his finger. "Come and get it." Gwandoya's eyes blazed. "I will not set foot in that cursed city. Anyone who steals from it is turned to." A great rush of wind came from behind Aladdin, so powerful that it pushed the boulder door shut, leaving Gwandoya outside. The man could be heard shouting and hammering outside, but the rock didn't move. "What in heaven's name?" Aladdin began, risking a glance over his shoulder. "I said not to give it to him," Kaveh said calmly, pressing his back to the boulder and folding his arms. Realization dawned. "You opened all the doors. Even that one. No man could move that stone. Not even Gwandoya. Now you're in here with me. What are you?" "I told you. I'm the servant of the ring," Kaveh said smugly. After a moment, he relented and added, "My previous owner charged me with protecting the city. Only one who wears my ring can open the door from the outside when it is closed, and no outsider may pass through the city gates with gold from the city that does not belong to him." Dread curdled in Aladdin's belly. What happened to the ones who tried? Kaveh waved his hand behind him. They made a generous contribution to the city's wealth. Aladdin approached what appeared to be a line of dusty statues. He lifted his torch and reached to brush the dust off the nearest one's face. "By all that's holy!" Aladdin jumped back. Bugra's horrified face stared back at him, above a tunic that bulged with the treasures he'd tried to steal. Too heavy for him to carry, Aladdin realized, for they'd cursed him into a gold statue. He swallowed. "What have you done to him?" Kaveh shrugged. "My master wanted me to just kill them, but who wanted decaying corpses stinking up the city gates? Especially if no one was home. So I thought gold statues might be better. When the prince returns, he can melt them down for the treasury." "Will that hurt them?" Aladdin asked. "Of course not. They're dead. Does a chicken feel when you roast its corpse?" Unbidden, Aladdin's stomach growled even louder this time. "I would much prefer a chicken to a statue," he admitted. Kaveh clapped his hands. "I can help you there. I know where the prince's storerooms are, where he keeps a lifetime supply of honeyed dates, among other delicacies." Though he was now trapped in an underground city with a strange man who glowed blue, while another madman hammered on the gates, for the first time since he'd left home, Aladdin began to feel the tiniest bit better about his future. Any future that held honeyed dates had to be good, he was sure of it. 10. "Your Highness, the woman is here," the maid said, bowing low. There was a slight emphasis on the word woman, that made it sound like an insult. Maram set down her sewing, already inclined to be grateful to Aladdin's mother. She'd never much liked sewing, but she'd needed to do something with her hands to still her impatience. Now the search was over, she could stop. "Is she alone?" "Yes, princess." Maram fought to hide her disappointment. "See that she is served refreshments while she waits." "I will be there directly." Maram chose her favorite gown, a jeweled thing that impressed even the richest kings, for this audience, and struggled not to tap her foot with impatience as her maids dressed her. Her reflection was quite dazzling to behold, Maram fancied, turning this way and that in front of her mirror. Too dazzling for a woman Aladdin had described as a simple spinner. Of course it was. She ordered her maids to bring her the plainest gown she owned. Maram should have known better. They brought her a gown of a purple so deep it appeared black, with a matching veil. Tiny glass beads sewn onto it only helped complete the illusion, for they were invisible against the black. To the casual observer, she appeared to be in deep mourning, but once light hit the fabric, it glimmered like the starry sky over the desert. It was far from plain, but it would have to do. When her maids had made sure the veil covered all but her eyes, as befitted a princess at a public audience, Maram headed out of her apartment into the palace proper. As she approached the room where she'd asked Aladdin's mother to be shown to, she heard raised voices. No, one raised voice, a wailing woman, rising over the softer male voices in the room. Maram's heart constricted in her chest. Had something happened to Aladdin? No, surely not. She stepped into the room, unnoticed. A woman in black rose up onto her knees, clutching the hem of a guard's tunic in her white-knuckled hands. "Please tell me what you have done with my son. He's a good boy, he would not do anything to offend the Sultan. Take me instead." She collapsed on the floor, sobbing, before she accosted the other guard with a similar plea. Neither guard seemed to know what to do with the woman, and they both looked relieved to see Maram. "You may go," Maram said, then surveyed the room. "Where are the refreshments I asked for? See that they are brought here immediately." "Yes, Your Highness." The two men bowed and hurried out. The woman threw herself full length on the floor before Maram. "Your Highness, please have mercy on a poor mother. Tell me why you have imprisoned my son." "Aladdin is in prison?" The woman let out a wail. "It is a mistake, a misunderstanding. My son would never do anything to offend the Sultan." Maram shook her head. "Mistress, please get up. Tell me what has happened to Aladdin." The woman rose to her knees, wiping her eyes with her veil. Hers was black, though so threadbare Maram could see through it. I do not know. He left to find work, as he does every morning, but he did not return. No one has seen him. Then some guards came to my humble house and told me to come with them to answer questions about my son. Please, Your Highness, tell me what he has done. Maram beckoned one of the guards back into the room. He stood in the doorway, reluctant to enter any further. Send a man to the prisons to see if a man named Aladdin is held there, and if he is, find out what his crime may be. The man bowed deeply. I will, Your Highness, but we already checked there. There is no prisoner of that name anywhere in the city. The only Aladdin we could find is reputed to be this woman's son, so we brought her. As she said, the man has not been seen for days. Maram nodded and dismissed him. Mistress, please, can you tell me your name? This humble mother is called Sadaf, Your Highness. Mistress Sadaf, please sit with me. Maram gestured to the table where, finally, the food and drink had been laid out. She gestured for one of the maids to shut the door behind her, and Maram was alone with Aladdin's mother. Only then did she unwind her veil so that Aladdin's mother might see her face. Sadaf crept timidly to the cushion Maram indicated, still not raising her eyes to Maram's face. Maram settled on her own cushion. Mistress Sadaf, I have invited you here to. What could she say? She wanted to ask where Aladdin had been since that day in the bathhouse, but if she had no idea where he was. I wish to ask about your son, Maram said finally. Is it possible that he has left the city? Sadaf shook her head. Aladdin has never stepped out of the city gates, Your Highness. He was born here and he has never left. So when he did not come home, I thought. She covered her mouth but not fast enough to hold in a sob. We will find him, Maram said, though she had no idea how. If her father's men hadn't found him inside the city by now, it stood to reason that he was either not in the city, or he was dead. No, surely not dead. Sadaf burst into noisy tears. Thank you, Your Highness. I do not know what we have done to earn such kindness, but if there is anything I can do to repay you, tell me and it is yours. If he returns, when he returns, Maram corrected herself, send him to the palace to see me. Who should he ask for, Your Highness? If my son came to the palace asking to see a princess, he would surely be turned away, Sadaf said. She was right. No one would see Aladdin the way Maram did. Tell him to ask for Princess Maram. No, he is to tell the guards that Princess Maram commanded him to present himself at the palace. They would believe that. As you command, Your Highness. Sadaf bowed low. No, I don't. I ask. Maram stopped, lost. Mistress Sadaf, please understand me. It is not a command. That is only what he must tell the guards. Tell Aladdin that I wish to see him, and if he wishes to see me, what to say to the guards. There, that sounded better. Sadaf's knowing eyes were upon her, and Maram didn't know where to look. My son is as charming as his father. I do not know how you came to meet him, Your Highness, but if my son is in prison, then it is because he is accused of being a thief, Sadaf said. Aladdin is a thief? She didn't want to believe it. If he was a thief, surely he would have stolen something from her in the bathhouse. He hadn't touched her jewels, her clothes, nothing. Sadaf smiled faintly. My son has never stolen anything in his life, or so I had thought, but a princess's heart is something so precious, so priceless, perhaps he could not resist. She bowed low once more. I will do as you ask, Your Highness, if I am lucky enough to see my son alive again. Without waiting to be dismissed, Sadaf backed out of the room and left. Maram couldn't seem to close her mouth. Were her feelings for Aladdin that obvious? Surely she did not look as hopelessly enamored of him as the royalty of the northern lands were of her. Surely not. She shook the silly thought out of her head. What she looked like and what Siddharth thought didn't matter. Aladdin was missing, and if he'd been missing long enough for his mother to despair of his return, he must be found. 11. Aladdin woke to find his head pounding, as though he'd drunk too much wine. As if he could afford to drink wine. "Where in heaven's name am I?" he asked the inky darkness. "Tasnim, the forgotten city," a familiar voice replied, as a glimmering blue ball appeared and expanded to become a man. "Kaveh." "And why does it feel like a camel stomped on my head?" "That would be the cask of Prince Ferdor's private reserve you drank." Kaveh sounded amused. "It's powerful stuff, or it was a century ago, when he first bought it. Now it must be strong enough to kill an ox. I told you to drink sparingly, but you told me you were too thirsty." Aladdin lurched to his feet. "Well, now I don't want wine. I want water. I'm sure I saw a well around here somewhere." "You won't find any water in it. Why do you think all the people left? Without water, the city would die." Kaveh began to tell a story about a ruling prince who vanished when the water did, and the fate of his people, but Aladdin shut him out, and concentrated on looking for water. His mouth tasted like rats had nested in it and used his throat for a privy. He never wanted to drink wine again. In the faint blue light from Kaveh following him, Aladdin came to one of the wells he remembered. A dusty bucket lay on the ground beside the well, so he hooked it up to the rope and lowered it into the depths, praying for the splash. He'd almost lost hope when he heard it, though the sound was faint and deep. Aladdin let the bucket drop lower, then began hauling it up again, hand over hand. It was heavier than before, he was certain of it. When the bucket rose into sight, the blue reflection on the surface of the liquid of the brimming pail was enough for him to let out a hoarse cheer. "I wouldn't drink that if I were you," Kaveh said. Aladdin ignored him again. He lifted the bucket to his lips, and only then did the stench reach him. Aladdin coughed. "What is that?" "It can't be water." Kaveh grinned. "Well, it was once water. Before some bastard pissed it out maybe, and threw it down the well before he left the city. Where it's been festering ever since." Aladdin gagged and tipped the bucket's contents back where they'd come from. "Is there no water in the city at all?" Kaveh shook his head. "That's what I've been trying to tell you. There's no water here. The only liquid to drink in this city is wine." Aladdin had drunk enough wine to last him a lifetime. "So where's the nearest source of water?" "Half a day's ride back the way we came." Of course it was. The oasis where Gwandoya had first called a halt, Aladdin would wager. How long would it take to walk? Kaveh eyed him critically. "Forever. You wouldn't last the distance, not as starved as you are. You'd need to stay here for a month at least, emptying the royal larders, before you had sufficient strength." "There isn't enough water here to last a month." Kaveh brightened. "But there is more than enough wine, even after seeing the way you drink it. You'll need a flask or two for the journey, for it is at least a full night's march to the oasis." "A month? My mother will go mad with worry over me. I must set out as soon as night falls." Kaveh shook his head. "And I thought you were a bright one. You will not survive, you fool. And what of the treasure you wanted to take back to win your princess? Even if you had the strength to make it to the oasis before the sun rises, you would not be able to carry anything of value back with you. If you return home, it will be poorer than when you left." The princess? Maram was the least of Aladdin's concerns now. But taking something home as payment seemed like a good idea. At least he'd have something to show for this foolishness. What of the curse that prevents thieves leaving with their ill-gotten goods? Aladdin asked suspiciously. "Are you trying to get me turned into a statue like the others, so that I can enrich the city too?" "I'll carry it out," Kaveh said. "The curse doesn't apply to me. Why, I could proclaim you as the new Prince of Tasnim, rightful owner of the city and all its riches, and no one would contradict me." "A prince?" Aladdin tried to sound skeptical, but the tantalizing thought of walking into the Sultan's palace, being announced as a prince, before asking for Maram's hand in marriage, was too strong to resist. Kaveh smiled. "A fitting husband for a princess, if you carry a suitable gift for her and for her father. For even just the chance of seeing Maram again, it was worth the risk. A week then. In 7 days, when the sun sets, I will set out for the oasis. And while we wait, I shall show you all the secrets of Tasnim and its treasures." Kaveh's grin broadened. "Treasures fit for a princess, as you shall see." What the prince kept in his harem was vastly superior to what he locked in his treasury. "I thought you said everyone was gone. Do you mean to say the women are still here?" Aladdin asked, horrified. "We have to save them." The prince's concubines were the first to leave, taking all their jewels with them. "I am sure they are as far from the city as they can get." Kaveh's eyes glowed brighter. "No, it is what they did not take that I must show you." Aladdin nodded. "Then let me find a flagon of wine, if there is nothing else to drink in this place, so that I may break my fast and drink to the vanished prince's health, before I steal his most precious treasures." This did not sit well with Aladdin, but what other choice did he have? "As the Prince of Tasnim, you cannot steal your own things. They are yours, as is everything in the city." "You shall see," Kaveh said. "I have proclaimed it, therefore it must be so." Aladdin sighed. He'd gone from one madman's clutches to another, and still he had none of the promised wealth either had lured him with. Oh, he still had the blackened lamp tucked into his tunic, but what use was such a thing here? Still, this madman had the only light in the city, and he was the only man who could open the doors, so Aladdin followed him deeper into the labyrinth. It seemed the most sensible thing to do. For the moment. 12. Kaveh pushed open the city gates, then peered outside. "There's no one here," he reported. "Just like I told you." Aladdin breathed out a sigh of relief. If Gwandoya wasn't waiting for him, then perhaps he would be able to make it home alive. He still had a desert to cross, a daunting thought even with Kaveh's help. "Do you have the wineskins?" Aladdin asked. He would drink the contents tonight, and refill them with water when they reached the oasis. After he had drunk his fill of water for the first time in a week. "I have the wineskins and everything else you wanted. I may not be a particularly powerful jinn, but I do have some talents," Kaveh said with a sniff. Talents such as carrying enormously heavy loads, or moving heavy things, Aladdin knew now. And to be visible or not, as he chose, along with whatever he was touching. A week with the man had given him a greater understanding of both Kaveh and the city of Tasnim. But there was still one question he hadn't answered. "Why are you helping me again?" Aladdin asked. "To see this princess of yours," Kaveh replied. "I told you that." Aladdin sighed. Kaveh could keep his secrets. Aladdin had enough to worry about. "Let's go then, or we will never reach the city where she lives." The sun might have sunk behind the desert dunes, but the sand still held its heat, which bit at Aladdin's boots. Boots Kaveh had insisted he take from the prince's things, along with suitable clothing for braving the desert. So now Aladdin wore fabric finer than even Kaveh, and leather so soft he wanted to stroke it. So if he died in the desert, at least his corpse would be well dressed, Aladdin consoled himself, then snorted. Small consolation for failure. He did not intend to fail. He intended to live and return home to his mother, and maybe, just maybe, see Maram again. It was hope that kept him trudging through the desert dunes until the sun rose high in the sky, following Kaveh's directions even as the heat shimmered off the sand and blinded him. Every valley seemed an oasis, but when he reached it, there was no water to be found. It was nearly noon when Aladdin reached the oasis, and he threw himself face down in the water, gulping his fill. He would have drowned there perhaps if not for Kaveh, who dragged him into the shade formed by a stand of palm trees. Aladdin fell into an uneasy doze, which turned into sleep as the sun sank once more. Kaveh woke him at dawn. "Time to move or you will be roasted alive," he said. Aladdin managed to make it to the makeshift shelter Kaveh had constructed while he slept. Fallen palm fronds and some coarse sacking made a bower out of the hastily dug hole in the ground, but Aladdin was nevertheless grateful for it. Kaveh produced some nuts Aladdin didn't dare ask where from and a filled water skin, then told Aladdin to rest. Despite spending all night asleep, Aladdin had no trouble obeying the jinn. He'd never walked so far in his life, and as soon as night fell, he had the other half of his journey to finish. If he survived the day. To Aladdin's surprise, Kaveh woke him at sunset, and he almost felt optimistic about his chances of reaching home. The oasis was scarcely out of sight by the time Aladdin disabused himself of that notion. The blisters he'd barely noticed on the first day had swelled to carbuncles in his boots, and the sun had found him inside his little shelter while he slept, burning his skin as surely as boiling water would. Yet on he slogged, for Aladdin knew he was headed home. One foot in front of the other until he could go no further. Aladdin fell to his knees. "I can't," he wheezed. "I'm not going to let you die out here, so some corpse robber can pick me up." "Get up." Kaveh slid an arm under Aladdin's shoulders and heaved him to his feet. "If I have to carry you the rest of the way, we're going to reach the city." So Aladdin staggered on while Kaveh helped him until Aladdin saw what looked like the city gates looming before him, lit with the fierce light of a desert dawn. "I'm home," Aladdin mumbled. "Not yet, you're not. Where do you live?" Kaveh asked grimly, his grip tightening around Aladdin. Aladdin pointed and mumbled something he hoped made sense. He was moving again, so Kaveh must have understood some of it, at least. "Do you recognize this place?" Kaveh asked impatiently. Aladdin peered blearily at the worn door he'd opened and closed 1,000 times. Good." Kaveh shoved the door open. Aladdin staggered inside, then pitched forward into oblivion. Kaveh cursed. "Hello, lady of the house. Is this your son?" he called. A woman emerged from the dimness, hastily wrapping a veil around her hair. "Aye, Aladdin?" Aladdin was beyond responding. "I found him outside the city walls," Kaveh said. "He said he lived here." "He does. Oh, how can I ever thank you? Or repay you?" the woman asked, falling to her knees beside Aladdin. "You have answered a mother's prayer." Kaveh smiled. Granting wishes, who'd have thought? While Aladdin's mother was distracted, Kaveh disappeared. For the moment, his job was done. 13. "Have you heard anything?" Maram asked fretfully. The guardsman shook his head. "No, Your Highness. I have told the prison guards to send word if they see a man with that name, but no one has seen him." "Are you sure he exists?" "Of course he does. And so does his mother." Maram snapped. The guard bowed deeply. "My apologies, Princess, if I have offended you." If this man knew half the things she'd seen and done in foreign courts, he would not worry about offending her. Maram hid her smile. "You are forgiven. I am frustrated. I do not understand how a man can vanish in this city and not be found." "Perhaps he is not in the city, Your Highness." She'd thought the same thing, but Sadaf had insisted Aladdin never left the city. Sadaf, perhaps she should send for the woman again? Maram considered for a moment, then shook her head. No, Sadaf had promised to send word if her son returned. If she had half the honor of her son, then she would notify the palace the instant Aladdin returned. Unless he did not want to see her. Maram swallowed. If Aladdin did not want to see her again, would Sadaf tell her? Or would she worry about offending a princess too? If you have not heard anything by the end of the week, summon Sadaf the spinner to the palace, Maram said. Another bow. As you wish, your highness. No, what she wished was to see Aladdin now, at this very moment, but Maram knew as well as anyone that wishes were seldom granted, and when they were, they would rarely be what one wants. So she sighed and forced herself to find some distraction to keep her mind busy until she received the word she wanted, or the week ended. Whatever came first. 14. Aladdin was certain he had to be dreaming, for he distinctly heard his mother's voice, and his mother never left the city. Even if Burke had told her where her son had gone, there was no way she would venture out alone to search for him, and she did not have the money to hire men to help her. So he took his time opening his eyes, for surely he had collapsed in the desert, and the sun above would be drinking the last drops of water from his body before it killed him. At least the last thing he heard would be his mother's voice and not Gwandoya's mad laughter. And dying of thirst was faster, kinder than a slow death by starvation. He almost felt like he was lying on a bed, instead of in the unforgiving sand. Still, the sand at the oasis had been soft. But someone would find his body and the ring, and Kaveh would be angry that some corpse robber had him. So Aladdin had to get up and struggle on, or Kaveh would roll a boulder across him. Aladdin forced his eyes open and sat up. His head hurt like he'd drunk too much wine again, but he'd grown used to that in Tasnim. He blinked away the blurriness, waiting to see either the desert or the rock walls of Tasnim. What he did not expect to see were the whitewashed walls of his mother's house. "Maman," he croaked. If this truly was her house, she must be here, for he'd heard her voice. He heard something crash to the floor. Aladdin? A moment later, she emerged from the gloom. "How did I get here?" he asked. "And do you have any water?" "Of course." She reached down, and only now did Aladdin see the jug and cup on the floor beside him. She filled the cup and handed it to him. Aladdin drained it, then refilled it himself and drank a second cup before his parched throat felt moistened enough to speak. "How did I get here?" Maman shot a dark glance over her shoulder. "Your friend Kaveh carried you in here half dead from exposure and thirst. He comes every day bringing food and other things, but he refuses to take any money or thanks for it. And he disappears, like he has done again. It is as though he does not wish to be seen here." Something tightened around Aladdin's finger, before the pressure eased as quickly as it had come. Kaveh's ring. He was not gone, the pressure reminded him. "I will settle everything with him, Maman," Aladdin promised. "You don't need to worry about it." "I do not trust him. Yes, he saved your life, but he has secrets that he does not say." His mother frowned. "Let the man keep his secrets. He is allowed to them. We still must pay him. Did you bring any money back from whatever you were doing?" "I searched your clothes, but all I found was this thing." She held up the blackened lamp. "Perhaps we can get a coin or two for it. It is heavy brass. If I can polish it well, perhaps enough to pay him back a small amount." Before Aladdin could stop her, she spat on the lamp and began to rub at it furiously with a handful of her skirt. Blue smoke erupted from the spout of the lamp, pouring out until it filled the room from floor to ceiling. Just like with the ring, the smoke took the form of a man so enormous he had to bend double to fit in the room. "I am the servant of the lamp," the smoky man boomed. "What do you wish of me?" Maman's eyes widened in terror, and she whimpered as she tried to back away from the jinn, for surely this was another of Kaveh's kind. Then she overbalanced, falling backward and striking her head against the wall. "Maman? Are you all right?" Aladdin asked, rushing to check. The back of her head was bleeding from where it had hit the wall, but she still drew breath. He carried her to the bed, not sure what else to do. I said, "What do you wish of me?" Aladdin whirled to face the jinn. The lamp had fallen to the floor, so he picked it up. "You frightened my mother, and now she is hurt. I wish you would fix the mess you have made." "I cannot undo what has been done, but I can heal her," the jinn said. Aladdin blinked in surprise. It took him a moment before he had the presence of mind to say, "Then do it." He watched in fascination as the jinn bent over his mother, holding out his hands. Blue light arced from his hands to her until her head was enveloped in a blue cloud. Then he waved his hand and the light died. "It is done," the jinn said. "When she wakes, it will be as though she was never injured. What else do you wish of me?" Aladdin wet his lips. "Answers. What are you?" "I am the servant of the lamp, and my master is whoever holds it in his hands." "So you are a jinn?" "Yes." "You can perform magic? What sort of magic can you do?" The jinn swelled to fill half the room. "I can make you the richest man alive. Transport you to the farthest reaches of the earth and back again in the blink of an eye. Build you a palace so magnificent even the sultan will beg to see inside." Aladdin sucked in a breath. He wanted all of those things, but he knew nothing came without a cost. Before he wished for anything, he needed to talk to Kaveh. He knew Kaveh, whereas this jinn was a stranger. "What would you wish me to do first, master?" the genie rumbled. Aladdin thought for a moment. His belly rumbled, reminding him that it had been a long time since he'd eaten. Kaveh had provided him with food, and there had been no ill consequences from that. Finally he said, "I am hungry. Bring me something to eat." The jinn bowed low, then vanished. "Show off," Kaveh muttered, emerging like a wraith from the ring. "Mr. High and Mighty, all-powerful master of everything. Do you know him?" Kaveh glared at the lamp. "I have seen him before, yes. Prince Philemon was master of the lamp for a time before he disappeared, and he had no need for me when he had him. He handed me to one of his servants, who sold me to buy bread after he left the city. To the madman I'd rather not return to." "Would you rather I'd asked you to fetch my food?" Kaveh looked affronted. "You had no need to ask him for anything. I gave you the contents of the royal larder. I still have some of it too. If I can remember where I hid it. Must be here somewhere, the house isn't that big." He wandered about the room, waving his arms as though he expected to touch something unseen. "Ah, here. You liked the prince's almonds, so I brought 2 barrels. I liked them because they were the only thing that didn't require cooking, or taste so sweet they made me terribly thirsty," Aladdin replied. He'd eaten so many almonds in the last week, he'd happily live the rest of his life, without eating another. "Oh," Kaveh seemed crestfallen, but not for long. "I brought the prince's garden too. That will impress your princess, you'll see." "The entire garden?" Aladdin had briefly wandered through what Kaveh had called the harem gardens, a large high-ceiling cavern filled with artificial trees made of metal and gemstones. Every jeweled leaf, flower and fruit had been lovingly crafted so each was unique, but under all the dust Aladdin had found it hard to be impressed. It had looked so forlorn, a world that had once glittered with magic but was now brown and dull with dust. Just the trees. Most of the shrubs. And all the flowers. The entire garden then. Where did you put it all? Kaveh opened his mouth. "Ah." A cloud of blue smoke exploded into the room, then parted to reveal a host of golden dishes bearing a banquet of more food than Aladdin had ever seen in his life. Things that could only have come from the palace kitchen, or one like it. "Your meal, master," the huge jinn boomed. Maman screwed up her face, moving restlessly in the bed as though she were about to wake. She would not be happy to see the giant jinn in the house still. "Now go hide in the lamp or wherever it is you go until I summon you again," Aladdin said. The jinn set the dishes down and disappeared. Just in time for Maman sat up. "What was that thing?" "Nothing, Maman. I have food for us. What would you like to eat?" Maman looked around in bewilderment. "Where did you get the money for so much food or such dishes?" Kaveh had disappeared again, leaving Aladdin to explain on his own. "I fear you would not believe me, Maman. It is a story for another time. But I did not steal them and they belong to us now. Of that I am certain. Now let us eat, and when we are done, perhaps we can sell the dishes to a goldsmith so we can buy you some new clothes." Maman nodded. "Very well. We can talk after we have eaten." For the first time in longer than he could remember, Aladdin sat down to a meal with his mother, where they both ate their fill. For once he'd done something right. 15. "You wish to see me, father?" Maram asked as she stepped into the Sultan's lavish apartments. She did not want to go on another diplomatic mission until she knew what had happened to Aladdin, but she could hardly refuse. "Which part of the world would you like me to conquer next?" He laughed, for he knew as well as Maram did that she spoke only partly in jest. "No, I am happy to have you home, daughter, at least for now. It is your future I am thinking of, and all the conquests you have already made. You deserve a reward." Maram clapped her hands. "Then you will build a bigger bathhouse on the palace grounds? I know just the place." Father shook his head. "No, we have all the bathhouses we need. And you will not be here to use it when it is built, so where would the point be in that?" Maram's heart turned cold. "Where will I be, father?" This news did not bode well. He waved for her to sit down. Maram selected a fat cushion and took her seat. "You know that my vizier, Ali, has been a good and faithful advisor to me since I ascended to my father's throne. As deserving of reward as you, in fact," the Sultan began. Maram nodded slowly. Yes, Ali was a good advisor to her father. He had an astute mind, and while she did not always agree with him on international relations, she still respected his experience in matters of local politics. He has had several wives and many children by them. A new young wife would be a burden to him, I am sure. Indeed, and so he has told me. In fact, when I asked him what reward he would want from me in return for his loyal service, his thoughts were for his children. Maram waited, her dread building. She had no intention of training some poor girl to be a courtesan. She might have chosen this path for herself, but she would not recommend it for anyone, and she would fight her father if he tried to force one of the vizier's daughters to become her replacement. His oldest son, Hassan, who he hopes will succeed him as vizier one day, has never married. Ali says it is because he wishes to have only one wife, the most perfect of all. It seems he has been madly in love with you since your first diplomatic mission together. Father smiled indulgently. Hassan can go fuck a camel, for I'll never let him touch me, Maram wanted to say, but those were not the right words to say to the Sultan. They weren't entirely true either. She'd prefer the camel to do the fucking, forcing itself on Hassan as the man had tried to do to her. Hassan is not the husband I would have chosen, Maram said instead. It would be a good match for him and also a politically astute one for her, as she and her children would never have a strong claim on the throne, so Hassan could not usurp the place of her father or, upon his death, one of her brothers. I had not thought to ask you to choose a husband yet, but Anahita tells me it is time, father continued. Maram's blood boiled. Why that little sneak? Avenging herself on Maram for suggesting Anahita marry again. If Anahita hadn't already left the palace to seek her new husband, Maram would slap her silly. She still would when she saw Anahita again, for the girl never stayed married for long. Maram forced herself to swallow down her ire. She was a politician, she knew how to negotiate better than anyone. Perhaps it is time for me to marry, before I am too old for motherhood. But I would not want to marry a man who is unworthy, or who could not provide for me and my children. I am comfortable here in the palace, father, and I would not wish to live anywhere less comfortable. Before I consent to marry this man, I would like to see him build me a palace fit for a princess. With a bathhouse, she thought, but did not say. Because when he failed to include a bathhouse that pleased her, she could delay further by insisting that it be built. Father nodded thoughtfully. Yes, you are right. He must have a house deserving of his bride. So we will announce your engagement tomorrow as I had planned, but the wedding must wait until Hassan has provided a suitable place for you to live. Maram allowed herself to breathe again. Construction was slow, so she would have time to locate Aladdin in that time. Perhaps even persuade him to change his mind about becoming her lover. In the meantime, she had to find a way to stop this marriage to horrible Hassan. She should have shoved a knife in his guts when she'd had the chance, all those years ago, instead of holding it to his manhood, and threatening to amputate his crown jewels if he did not leave her alone. Now, if all else failed, she would find an assassin to do the job for her. 16. And so that is where I have been. Exploring an underground city, getting left behind, and having to trek through the desert to get home, Aladdin finished. He'd managed to tell his mother the truth without mentioning Jinn once. A truly alarming tale, my son. But what does this have to do with the princess? Maman asked gravely. Aladdin choked on his water, briefly becoming a fountain before his coughing fit eased. What princess? Her Highness Princess Maram, who summoned me to the palace to give you a message, Maman said. What message? He asked faintly. Maman scrutinized his face. You do not seem surprised that one of the Sultan's daughters would summon me, or leave a message for you. Now he'd done it. I met her once in the marketplace. She was very gracious. What was a princess doing in the bazaar? He could answer this without incriminating himself too much. She had just returned from a long journey abroad, and she was on her way to the bathhouse. Princesses do not. Maman's eyes widened. Most princesses do not. Only one does. The traitor queen's daughter, the witch the Sultan sends abroad to enchant foreign princes. Maman shook her head. No wonder she is so beautiful and yet unmarried. What man would want a wife who has known more men than she can count, and foreigners at that? Unwashed, uncouth, unmannered, with no idea of proper behavior, and they eat the strangest things. No stranger than Gwandoya, though he was a foreigner too, from southern lands instead of those in the north from whence the Crusaders came. But Aladdin didn't want to think about the madman. His thoughts were of Maram and his mother's slight to the lovely woman. What man would deserve her, he corrected. Beautiful, enchanting, gracious, and the Sultan's daughter. Every man desires her, whether she wills it or no. But it is her father who will not allow her to marry. She is too valuable as an envoy to ever be free. Careful, my son. It sounds like you are under her spell too. If she is forbidden to marry as you say, then you risk heartbreak even thinking about her. Forget her. Aladdin shook his head. I cannot. And if she gave you a message for me, then she has not forgotten me either. Maman, please tell me, what did Princess Maram say? She sighed. She wanted me to tell you to present yourself at the palace, saying she commanded you to do so. But I fear that if you do, it will only result in your doom. If you are lucky, the palace guards will turn you away. If you are not lucky, it is only a matter of time before the princess tires of you, and she will have you killed or imprisoned without hesitation. Please, I beg you, do not do as she asks. Aladdin nodded slowly. You are wiser than you know, Maman. The palace guards will never admit a street rat into the Sultan's palace. But you have been allowed in. You have dined with the princess herself. You must go to the palace and present a gift to the Sultan for me. If he likes my gift, then you will ask the Sultan to summon me, so that I might beg for the hand of his daughter. No, I cannot. The Sultan will not see me. And what gift can you possibly offer that he will accept? Aladdin held out a cloth-shrouded bundle, peeling the layers away to reveal the treasure beneath. A small jeweled shrub, perhaps 2 handspans in diameter, glittered in the lamplight. Each berry was made up of a cluster of amethysts so dark they almost seemed black, a stark contrast to the mother-of-pearl petaled blossoms. Together with the green agate leaves, the whole thing weighed far more than a shrub should, but Aladdin thought his mother could manage it. Give this to the Sultan as my gift, and tell him that if he allows me to make Princess Maram my bride, I will give him a whole garden of trees and bushes such as this. I will take it to the Sultan and we shall see what he says, she said doubtfully. As long as you are sure this is what you want. Aladdin laughed. Maman, I have never been so sure of anything. This will work. I am certain of it. 17. Father had assembled what looked like his entire court, Maram reflected as she surveyed the crowded audience chamber. Ali the vizier and horrible Hassan stood triumphantly on the dais at what would be her father's right hand, which was why she stood as far to the left as she could. But she wasn't hiding, even if she could, in such a garish dress. The rose-colored gown and matching veil were richly embroidered in silver and gold. A diamond necklace matched the jeweled fillet that held her veil in place. Despite their magnificence, her diamonds were a calculated insult. She'd inherited them from her mother and they were well known, for the former sultana had worn them to court as often as she attended. Maram felt Hassan's eyes on her as her father's herald announced the sultan's arrival. Her father had a smile for her that she happily returned. Never mind that he wanted her to marry the wrong man, he had her happiness in mind, however misplaced his plans for it might be. No matter. Maram would make plans of her own. The Sultan reached the dais and commanded the court to rise. This took a moment, as many had prostrated themselves and clothing had to be straightened. When the susurrus of silk smoothing had died down, Father cleared his throat. My subjects, before I hear today's petitions, I have happy news to share with you. My daughter Princess Maram is engaged to marry Vizier Ali's son, Hassan. The wedding will take place once Hassan has finished building a palace suitable to house my favorite daughter. Hassan's grin died as he stared at the Sultan in horror. Father had not warned him earlier, it seemed. Maram made no effort to hide her triumphant smile as she surveyed the cheering crowd. A royal wedding meant a feast and an excuse to show off their finery, with perhaps the opportunity to win favors from the celebrating sultan or the newlyweds. Only one pair of eyes appeared as shocked as Hassan's, that of Aladdin's mother, Sadaf. She stood at the back of the crowd, barely visible behind the more pushy petitioners, but she met Maram's gaze as squarely as though the two women were equals, so great was her shock. When the cheering died down, Maram excused herself and made her way through the crowd to where she'd seen Sadaf. She needed to speak to the woman, to ask if her son had returned. Yet when she reached the back of the audience chamber, Sadaf was nowhere in sight. Maram hurried outside, hoping to catch the woman before she left. You arrogant bitch! When you are my wife, I will see that you learn your place, a voice behind her snarled. Hassan! He'd followed her out here. If I become your wife. You forget you have a palace to build first, Maram returned. There were a dozen guardsmen within hearing distance. If Hassan so much as touched her, they would arrest him in an instant at her command. But if she married him, he'd probably try to beat her to death. Try and succeed. I'll build a brothel for the likes of you. That should be good enough for the whore to foreign pigs. More than ever, Maram regretted letting this man live. Not for long. She'd find an assassin before sunset. Maram smiled sweetly. Build as many brothels as you wish. I'm sure you will need all the money you can muster to build a palace that meets my expectations. Oh, did my father not tell you? When he said you must build a palace fit for a princess, it is this very princess who will judge its quality. My place will be a palace as befits my high station. Whether it is my father's palace or yours will be up to you. She scanned the square, but it seemed that Sadaf had disappeared. Cursing Hassan for distracting her, she headed back to her apartments. Her only consolation was that she left him cursing just as colorfully behind her.